All right. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everyone joining us. Thank you so much for your time and for your willingness to look at these very interesting presentations. I invite you to go to the general page of this session and look at the different presentations and recordings. Just want to remind you very quickly. My name is Andres Vecino. I'm an assistant scientist at the Johns Hopkins Department of International Health. Just want to remind you very quickly before I present our presenters that this session is being recorded. This session will be, the recordings will be available 8 days after we end the Congress, and they will be available for 1 year. If you have any questions, we'll first allow all the presenters to present, and then we'll have a session for questions and answers that you can type in the chat, and I'll address them to each of them. And that's it, I think. So each of the presenters will have 10 minutes, and then after that, we'll go to a Q&A session. So I'd like to start with Tara Templin from Stanford Health Policy. Then we'll have the presentation from William Garcia from Proesa in Cali, Colombia. And then finally, we'll have the presentation from Liana Jacobi at the University of Melbourne. So without much further ado, Tara, please go ahead.
Thank you so much. All right, let's full screen. All right. Just a quick thumbs up. This is viewing. Yes. All right.
Perfect.
Well, thank you very much for being here today. The project I'm going to talk about examines the impact of lower food prices due to the North American Free Trade Agreement on obesity in Mexico. So it's well known that obesity is rising globally. Over the last 30 years, obesity prevalence, meaning people with a body mass index above 30, has doubled. And if we expand to consider adults with a BMI above 25, the prevalence of overweight and obesity has increased from 22% to 40% globally. Importantly, this is not just a rich country problem. Around 2/3 of the world's overweight and obese individuals are living in low and middle income countries. And the consequences of obesity are well known, namely that obesity has been linked to cardiovascular disease, diabetes, and cancers. And these consequences are unambiguously bad for public health. There's a lot of debate, though, about the causes of obesity. Sort of importantly around the relative importance of food prices, time to prepare nutritious calories, physical activity, education, addictive behaviors, and genetic predispositions. So declining real food prices are an interesting cause of obesity because lower food prices should enable people to purchase the same number of calories for a cheaper price. So in the graph below, you can see the World Food Price Index over time. And for most major food groups, prices have been declining historically. However, there's also evidence, particularly in the nutritional epidemiological literature, that cheaper calories tend to be found in high sodium and high sugar foods. So there's an important tension here for household well-being or welfare when food prices decline. Welfare could increase if cheaper food enables households to meet basic needs and perhaps even reduce undernutrition. But welfare could decrease with increased health costs due to obesity caused by those same cheaper calories. And importantly, from an economic perspective, if the declining real food prices from free trade cause obesity, then there are ambiguous effects of free trade on consumer welfare. So in this paper, we zoom into Mexico as a research setting. Mexico saw a rapid economic liberalization with declining consumer prices due to the North American Free Trade Agreement. And we're going to document that NAFTA decreased food prices, and in response, households bought more calories, particularly sugar. And we're also going to document that obesity and type 2 diabetes increased in response to declining food prices. Let's see. So importantly, we aggregate new data sources to investigate our research question, and sort of specifically, we identify data sources for each link in the causal chain from NAFTA tariffs to obesity. So starting with tariff rates on products, linking to product level consumer prices, and finally linking to product consumption and health outcomes in household surveys. So let's first look at the tariffs. We use NAFTA government documents from 1994, which record tariff rates and yearly repeals for each product. This gets at actually a really important detail about the North American Free Trade Agreement. While the policy was signed in 1994, the agreement was specifically that products would follow a stepwise repeal schedule. So for products scheduled for a 1994 repeal, this is simple. The average tariff rate of those products was slightly over 15% in 1993. And when the policy hits, the tariff rate is now 0 for those products. For products scheduled for a later repeal date, such as 1998, sorry, there was a stepwise tariff repeal each year. And there were also scheduled repeal dates in 2003, 2007, and 2008. Most foods were scheduled for the 2003 repeal, and sugar was scheduled for 2007. So next is price. And thanks to high inflation in 1993, the Central Bank of Mexico maintains weekly food price data in urban areas. And we collect these data at the product level and match it to the tariffs. So let's first answer some important questions about the relationship between tariffs and prices. Standard economic theory would say that free trade reduces prices, and we find that that is true here, namely that reduced tariffs lead to lower food prices. So to confirm this, we use an event study, which compares the prices of foods impacted by the tariff repeals to those not impacted before and after the specific repeal date. We find that consumer prices were 15 to 30% lower after the tariff repeals compared to products not impacted. And so while this might seem intuitive, it's important to confirm this because food suppliers might capture higher profits instead of passing on lower prices to consumers. So finally, we link the product level prices to household food purchases and their health outcomes. We use survey data from the Mexican Family Life Survey to observe these changes within households from 2002 to 2009. And this will specifically allow us to examine how households change food purchases, particularly nutrients such as proteins, fats, and carbohydrates, such as sugars. Importantly, we can also track health outcomes in these surveys, and that will allow us to track obesity and type 2 diabetes of these households longitudinally. So we use the price shocks due to NAFTA to estimate the effect of food price declines on nutrient consumption. And there's this important empirical issue to understand in estimating this relationship. So namely that the supply and demand for food simultaneously determine food prices. And if we see a lot of demand for sugar, we would expect the price of sugar to go up. And so without this price shock independent of demand, we'd have a biased estimate of the magnitude by which prices impact household food purchases. And so what we're really doing is sort of the tariff policies represent a shock to the cost of food suppliers, influencing the prices that are faced by households. So what we're going to do is sort of leverage that the NAFTA tariff repeal timings as an instrumental variable to isolate exogenous variation in the food prices. And so an important part of the event study was sort of showing that there was a strong relationship between NAFTA tariff reductions and food prices. And I'll sort of, for the sake of time, get to the results, but it's important to note that we're assuming that the NAFTA tariff reductions sort of besides through prices do not affect the household's consumption choices. So here's a graph that's describing the results. On the x-axis are different types of calories that households can consume. And on the y-axis is the effect size of price on consumption of that type of calorie. So we find that a 10% decline in price per calorie results in more calories purchased. Across the macronutrients of carbohydrates, fat, and protein, we find that price declines enable households to buy more of all types of calories. And we find a slightly larger response in total sugar consumed by households in these additional calories. Using the same strategy, we also estimate the effect of food prices on household health outcomes. And these results are going to focus on adults. So on the x-axis are the health outcomes, so hypertension, waistline circumference, diabetes, and obesity. On the y-axis is the percentage point increase in the health outcome due to a 10% decline in food prices. And the effect that we observe is most pronounced in obesity, where lower food prices due to NAFTA account for a 1.5 percentage point increase in obesity. So finally, for policy purposes, we take we take the results of these past two analyses and we sort of project it onto the observed changes in obesity prevalence in Mexico, and we can examine what percent of the prevalence change can be attributed to price changes over time. So before NAFTA, there was a baseline level of obesity of about 12%, represented by the gray square. The light green shading is obesity due to other factors. And using the observed price changes and estimated relationships, we find that roughly 20% of new obesity cases can be explained by overall price changes, and that roughly half of those can be traced to price changes due to NAFTA. So with that, I'll conclude. This is work in progress. So we've documented that that free trade in the case of NAFTA reduces food prices, making these calories more affordable, but at the same time, these calories are potentially linked to obesity, which has ambiguous effects for household welfare. So with that, thank you very much for your attention, and I look forward to the discussion.
Thank you so much, Tara, for your presentation, and let's go to the next one. William, please go ahead.
Okay, thank you, Andres.
Great, we can see the presentation.
Thank you. Good afternoon, good evening, good morning, wherever you are. I hope all of you to be well. I am William Garcia. I am researcher at the Social Protection and Health Economic Center at IHEA University in Cali, Colombia. Today I'm going to present a paper in progress that we have titled An Extended Estimation of Sugar Sweetened Beverages and Alcoholic Drinks Demand in Colombia. The paper is co-authored with Norman Maldonado and Jairo Jimenez. So here you can see the outline of the presentation. I'm going to start with the motivation and contribution. As many of you know, health taxes are the most cost-effective public health policy to reduce unhealthy consumption of sugar-sweetened beverages and alcoholic drinks. To derive this important conclusion, literature used data from household surveys, usually codified with COICOP. COICOP is a standard international classification of goods and services, but in this way, but we believe that in this way, expenditure and consumption is underestimated. And this underestimation could influence policy diagnostics and ex-ante evaluations. Additionally, it is not usual to find paper that model sugar beverages and alcoholic drinks jointly. We believe that doing so can improve policy recommendations. For these reasons, the questions we try to solve in this paper are: how much does demand for sugar beverages and alcoholic drinks vary due to changes in prices? And how does underestimation affect estimates of elasticities? With this paper, we are making three contributions to the literature. The first one is to estimate total consumption of sugar beverages and alcoholic drinks in Colombia using nationally representative data. The second one is to calculate cross-price demand elasticities for sugar beverages and alcoholic drinks. And the third one is to shed light on codifying bias in household surveys as data sources for these beverages consumption, and to show how these bias impact elasticities calculation and health policy recommendations. Our analysis is based on the National Income and Expenses Survey that was collecting in 2016-2017. This survey collects data from a sample that represents about 48 million people. This is the total population in Colombia that lives in 14 million households. This survey collects data expenses based on standardized food and other articles classifications that, as I mentioned before, might hide some sweetening and alcoholic risk consumption, and then bias demand elasticities. To correct this, we use a routine that estimates household consumption and unit values, includes in unit values that we are going to include in elasticity estimations. The routine has essentially five steps. First, we estimate, we calculate household consumption and expenditure based on codified survey responses. Second, we identify and codify responses based on description of articles, because this survey asks to every household member to report expenditures of in a week of reference in very detailed. Based on 1 to 2, we estimate daily per capita consumption and expenditure. We eliminate feasible values of consumption based on medical literature. Think that a kidney can process up to 16 liters of drinks per day. And finally, we calculate unit values by domains, because demand estimation requires some degree of exogeneity in prices. We estimate a quadratic, almost ideal demand system to derive on and cross price elasticities of sugar beverages and alcoholic drinks, as well as other related drinks, such as milk derivatives, hot drinks, and water. Dependent variables, the dependent variables in the demand system are expenditures by good eye, and among the independent variables are prices, that in our case are mean unit values by geographic areas and income level, and we also control for demographics. We also consider the sensor nature of the data and included the inverse meals ratio in each equation of the system. The first result is that not controlling for uncodified survey responses underestimate total consumption. look that codified consumption is about 30 liters per person per year. But when we include identified consumption based on article description, the total consumption rise to about 71 liters per person. Sugars with an price elasticity estimated with codified consumption is higher than the estimated with the correction of consumption data. If we just estimate the elasticity using codified data, we obtain a price elasticity of about 1.1. But when we include the identified and then in period uncodified consumption, price elasticity for sugar beverage reduces to 0.8. The same results applied. The same result applies to some alcoholic drinks like beer, as you can see here. These estimates suggest that not controlling for uncodified server responses could overestimate price elasticity and ex-ante policy impact evaluation that are frequently done with these estimates. With regard to the cross-price elasticity, estimates of sugar beverages and alcoholic drinks suggest that sugar beverages price increases could also reduce alcohol consumption. This, from a public health point of view, means that soda taxes could also reduce alcohol consumption. As you can see, the sign in the cross price elasticity is negative. To conclude, I would like to summarize some points of the discussion. This is the first paper to estimate sugar and alcoholic drinks cross price elasticity, at least in Colombia. Estimated price elasticity for sugar beverages was 0.8, similar or in a range similar to previous literature in Latin American countries. We also found evidence of complementarity rather than substitution patterns among sugar beverages and alcoholic drinks. This reinforces health taxes' potential to change unhealthy behavior. We also provide evidence that not controlling for uncodified survey responses might produce biased elasticity estimates that overestimate health taxes and policy impact. And that is all. Thank you for attending this presentation.
Thank you so much, William, for your presentation and for sticking to the time. Let's go to Liana Jacobi, and let's appreciate that Liana is in Melbourne and it's very early in the morning there. Go ahead, please.
Yeah, so I hope, yeah, I can stay fresh. Thanks for the great presentation so far. And it's also a great motivation or setup actually for my paper, which talks about the price elasticity estimation of food price elasticity, but just not looking at one food, but actually on 23 food groups, disaggregated food groups, and also doing so in a multi-stage demand analysis with expert prior information. And this is joint work with two public health scientists, Nung and Tony, from formerly both from New Zealand, and now Tony in Australia, also at Melbourne University, and Andres from Colombia, who's like me, an econometrician and economist and health economist. Now, it's already been said, right? Obesity is an increasing risk and something that needs to be tackled. And that has led to a discussion, also implementation of some food taxes and price subsidies. So there's a lot of talk about price-based intervention, which has also been raised in both talks so far. But it's actually not so straightforward. And the previous talk also mentioned it. There's a lot of issues regarding getting price elasticities correct. And we need to have good and precise own and cross price elasticity to assess different the impacts of different policy intervention. There's a couple of challenges that we want to focus here in the available price estimates, especially if you think about larger set of price estimates and cross price estimates across several disaggregated food groups. And first of all, they're mainly based on observational data. And so there's a lack of exogenous price variation. Secondly, food groupings are obviously often not defined by the researchers, so maybe not relevant in terms of nutritional outcomes, such as separating regular and diet soft drinks. And also the estimation usually does not take into account previous studies or available price elasticity information. So what we want to do in this paper is, we want to estimate own and cross price elasticity for a large set of disaggregated foods from all major food groups, and as also then estimate policy policy counterfactuals. And there's a couple of contributions here. We're going to look at the innovative virtual supermarket experiment, which has quite substantial and exogenous price variations and control over food groupings. And we have a Bayesian estimation framework as it allows us to include previous estimates into our analysis, and this will allow us to identify more precise price and policy impacts. Overall, we get a 10% reduction in precision, 10% increase in precision for own price elasticities, and 30% increase in precision for cross price elasticities, to just foreshadow key results. Now, just the virtual supermarket experiment had over 1,400 food items, and we're looking at 23 disaggregated food groups, and we have 4,258 completed shops that built the foundation for our analysis. Here we're going to look and use the almost ideal demand system. And so the budget share here for a food group is a function, as many of you probably know, prices and expenditure. So key parameters here in estimating the price elasticities are those gammas and there's betas, and when we focus on the estimation of own and cross price Marshallian price elasticities. A challenge here looking at disaggregated food groups is that we will have a lot of zero purchases with a high disaggregation looking at 23 food groups. So we're going to use a multi-stage budgeting approach and then the Edgerton approach to back out the price elasticities. And just to give you a look at how this all pans out, so we end up with a three-stage demand system, starting with the five main food groups on top, and then breaking it down into second and third stage food groups. And overall, we have 23 of these final ones here, including, for example, regular and diet food groups, which is hard to see, I think, with the transcription. So a key parameters are these gammas and deltas, because they're going to help us estimate the price elasticity. So we're doing a Bayesian estimation. So we compute the posterior distribution of price elasticities. So they're dependent on the posterior distribution of the demand parameters, and which means we have to formulate a prior distribution on the demand parameters. So our Bayesian analysis is quite standard and following previous work in that literature, but so far people assume just zero prior means for the demand parameters, which is obviously not correct, because that would lead to very nonsensical price elasticity estimates. So it also means we're throwing away available information. So in this study, what we propose is actually using two previous studies from New Zealand and Australia, where we back out price elasticity and cross price elasticity for all these 23 food groups. And then we actually propose a quadratic optimization approach to transform those information on the price elasticities from the relevant literature into assumptions about the demand parameters, which we then use for the analysis. And these are the prior means. And the other things that we can have an impact through is through the prior variance. And so how much weight do we put on these prior elasticities? And here our experts come in. They actually look at each of these 11 subsystems that I've showed you and compare this, look at the quality of the data in the studies versus our experiment, where we have some small sample sizes in some of the final food groupings. and then put scale parameters. But important to say, all of these scale parameters are set so that we do not rule out information from the data. So the data can always speak. So now I'm going to jump into the results, and just to remind me, I'm only looking for results for the final food groups and cross-price elasticities only for foods that were in the same final system. So here's one result for the final food groups 2 system, the diet, soft drinks, and regular soft drinks group, and we see negative own price elasticities as expected, but actually below 1, so not as elastic, for example, as fruit drink juices and non-alcoholic. And in terms of policy, right, we see here that a 10% increase in regular soft drink price would lead to a 6.6%, 63% increase in the demand for diet as soft drinks. But for example, DSD is not a substitute. DSD is a substitute for regular soft drink, but not vice versa. But the effects are maybe not as large, or the own price elasticities and cross price as we would hope as policymakers. Now, more general, what do we come away from combining information from this trial with exogenous price variation and previous studies? So we find the gains in precision and also stronger price responses, or the own price elasticities. So you see the black ones on the expert priors, the point estimates are lower. So I mean, they're beyond, closer to -1 or below, so tend to be more highly elastic. And also the spread of the estimates decreases, so we have a higher precision. Similar for cross price elasticities, we find, again, precision gains and stronger price responses. This could be so moving away from the 0 and having less credibility intervals that include the 0 line here for this large set of cross price elasticities that we are estimating. And I guess finally, I want to show you some policy implications. So we look at 3 policies: 30% tax on regular soft drink, 30% subsidies on fruits and vegetable, and also a $3 per 100 gram tax on saturated fat. So if you use our expert prior, we get a negative impact on regular soft drink from a 30% tax on regular soft drinks. And we see, comparing to the uninformative prior, more standard analysis, that we have stronger price responses and also tighter predictive intervals. As highlighted from the cross price elasticity in my little slide a little while ago, we can see that unfortunately it doesn't have a large impact on soft drinks. So we don't see a huge substitution into diet soft drinks from a tax on regular soft drinks coming out of this analysis, but strong effect from fruits, from the subsidies on fruits and vegetables, as well as impact from the saturated fat. And just to highlight, we're adjusting for in the longer run for overall food price elasticity in the New Zealand data. And I think with that, I'm almost out of time. So just to conclude, we look at a large set of price and cross price elasticities that had its own challenges. So we have 0 consumption, so we do a multi-staged and balanced band analysis. We use a experiment to avoid some issues such as endogenous price variation, but of course it has its own caveats, some smaller sample sizes in some of the more disaggregated demand system. But here we also combine information, use information from 2 previous observational studies to back out price elasticities, to combine that analysis, especially in the areas, in those subsystems where the sample sizes are not as large in the experimental data set. And overall, we find stronger price effect and higher precision, and also more precise and strong demand changes. And we have a working paper available that's currently being updated. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Liana, for sticking to the time, and that was fast. So
early morning.
Early morning. So we have 24 more minutes for questions. So I invite our audience to send their questions. I think Fabrice already sent a question to Tara. If consumers are rational, is there really an ambiguous effect for consumer welfare? Tara responded in the chat. This is a new thing in conferences, that you can respond on the chat instead of live. But perhaps I would invite Tara to describe a little bit her response to Fabrice.
Absolutely. Well, first of all, thank you for the question. It is a and for the Zoom questions and the Zoom responses. So this is a really critical question for the welfare calculation. It's actually been part of the paper that I've would really welcome feedback on. I think it's something that's really crucial for the paper, is sort of understanding which perspective to really take with how consumers react. And so right. So the key thing is starting from a rational, standard economic theory. If there are no behavioral or informational frictions, on the part of the consumer, we actually have an upper bound on what the welfare decline from obesity or any other sort of negative things, or we don't need to even call them negative, but it's whatever the welfare gain was due to the price decline, right? Consumers will sort of, importantly, the demand will internalize the effect of obesity if that's the case. So it's possible to do that calculation. There have been sort of like work by Hunt Alcott has thought about how to come up with internalities or how to think about irrational things that consumers do and how to quantify that. The others, and so that's all from a consumer standpoint, but from a I think there's also a sort of second point that one can take, which is that Mexico has a public health insurance system, and where the costs of those are sort of determined by the overall health of the population, and there are higher costs for everyone if obesity increases, and those costs might not be borne by the individual if there's a public health insurance system. And so thinking about, we sort of, if the customer is perfectly rational and is actually facing the costs of obesity, that's a very standard sort of part to start with. And then we can sort of add on these extra considerations. So it's a really important question, and it's one that I'm actively thinking about. I'd also love to hear what other considerations I'm, missing here.
Thank you, Tara. And we have more questions for you, but I'd like to go first to a question for Liana and William from Shu Wen. And she's basically, because you both are working with price elasticities, with lates and quates, the question is whether there's any investigation into subpopulations, for example, by income groups or along the consumption distribution. We might expect price elasticities to be very different based on this. Any plans to dig into this if possible? Liana.
Okay, thank you. It's a good question. It's a bit a limit of that study, right? It was designed to mimic the population of New Zealand. So actually, Tony Blakely, who's an epidemiologist, is constantly on the news now because of COVID. So they designed it to mimic the population in New Zealand. So it wasn't meant to be a study into subgroups. So it's a kind of a limitation. It was more to represent all the food groups and all the studies. So as a result, although Andres and I would be keen to do something like that as being, good microeconometricians as well, it's not like the focus of the study. So it's rather thinking about what would happen in the population. And the other reason, which I think I'm understanding coming into the public health as well through this project, and I'd be happy to be told about other people as well, is that whereas it's looking at the large set of food groups, because kind of thinking also, there are spillover effects between different food groups. So what happens, if we have policies and that's, impacts the whole population, and how overall does this impact nutritional impact in the whole population, kind of going back to what Tara is doing in a very different way of thinking, what are the all implication of nutritional outcomes of changes in prices, but here prices impacted by, different kind of health focused policies. And I should point out that that estimate of price elasticities and cross price elasticities has come out of this analysis is actually being used in a paper that's come out, I think, in the Lancet for predicting impacts on health. So there's been some health modeling on top of it that Tony has done with another group, which determined a bit of focus of that analysis that I'm doing here, which is kind of the underlying econometric analysis, you know, to get the best possible price elasticity for price for a precise prediction, which he felt the previous literature price elasticity weren't tight enough. And he has been in this literature, he wasn't tight enough to give him to do kind of this disease modeling on top. And so maybe that's a bit long-winded way of saying not in this study because the focus is a little bit different, but I think it's a very important one, but we can't take it out. Thanks.
Thank you, Liana. William?
Thank you for the question. Up to now, we have concentrated in the estimation of mean point estimate for the total population because our focus have been in estimating the bias introduced by error or not error but uncodified responses, but in some robustness checks and additional econometric exercises, we have found heterogeneity among income groups that are in line with the literature. For example, households in the lowest quantiles of the income distribution have a higher price elasticity, this means a higher consumption response to increases in prices. And
Actually, could I say one more thing now too? I just realized I maybe should have been time constrained, right? One of the big push for this experiment was also to induce some randomization in the budget of the households. So why they were asking the initial survey, how, you know, what do you spend on average on foods in a month in your household? When they actually did the virtual experiment, they were randomly assigned a budget. Now it was somewhere, you know, like within the range, you know, where they are. So income group, I guess, is your question. But I think what you're saying, at least we could maybe present some data on that, saying where, you know, because not everyone knows the New Zealand data, as well as some of the courses in this study, and see how, you know, where do they lie, so that we know what is maybe driving these results. So anyway, thanks you for all these suggestions.
Thank you, Liana and William. I'll come back to Tara. Perhaps there are three questions, one from Juan Salgado, one from Fabrice, and one from Ana Balsa, on whether you think that perhaps these changes might also be affected by changes in relative prices, that NAFTA perhaps change relative prices differently across different food groups, effects of marketing, and also effects on employment or income that might be explaining at least partially these results. Do you have any answer to that?
Great. Yeah, no, thanks. These are all wonderful questions, and all ones that I get to a little bit more into the working paper. It's a limited time slot. But let me first start with the marketing efforts. That is a really interesting question, and I want to actually, I don't have like data that I can point to, so I want to actually sort of thank Fabrice for that. I want to actually be able to point to some data on that question. For questions about could NAFTA have affected obesity through changes in employment and income, so I sort of run two sensitivity analyses on this. One is to first just look and see how wages are changing, and if there's sort of major employment shocks that are occurring with NAFTA. So and then the second thing that I do is I run a version of getting into the question about the change in relative prices. So I showed the nutrition results. However, I also have an AIDS analysis that sort of takes the usual food groups and imposes the usual assumptions of sort of substitution patterns across different food groups and within food groups, and that sort of explicitly models both the price effects and income effects of both the price change and also that we might expect with any income changes. And in that model, sort of the way that I instrument for income, it is possible that so what do these analyses show? These analyses show that there's sort of no major changes, at least in my house, in the households that I have in household income, that it's sort of fairly stagnant in terms of wages. That there's no there are instances of specific towns where there was factory entry due to NAFTA, but at least in my sample, it's not a significant portion of the group. Now, of course, I'd want to show specific tables showing all of this, and the last thing that we do is instrument income with actually all of the non-food tariffs to get a sense of the cost of production. So let's see. So that's income. We do some sensitivities around income. I think another thing that we could do is sort of like estimate the effects on consumption sort of by different income groups to see if the changes are substantially different amongst the poor versus the rich. I think and then as to the relative prices, we do sort of check substitutions and patterns of complementarity to actually like look at that question sort of more explicitly.
Great, thank you so much, Tara. If there are any other questions, please type them in the chat box. In the meantime, I'd like to ask a couple of quick questions to Liana and William. Liana, so speaking from someone who actually doesn't use as often Bayesian methods, I would just like to ask you, because you mentioned that there are stronger price responses from your model, and you attribute this to the Bayesian model, but at the same time, I'm wondering if the fact of using also the virtual supermarket, because you're using two things at the same time, perhaps that also affects because these are stated preferences in the end, perhaps to what extent this is also generating those stronger price responses, and it's not only the Bayesian estimation, but yeah. That'll be one question to you. And the question to William would be perhaps on whether it be, I think these results are great and good to know that there are these complementary effects between alcoholic beverages and SSBs. Will be the specific policy implications of these, William? How you where's the space in which you find that these results have specific policy implications in the context of the country? Liana.
So it's a great question. We're actually just trying to sort this out a little bit better, because there's several things going on. And so, for example, some of the price elasticities on some of the food groups are a little bit higher on our cross price in the previous studies. At the same time, there's some more exogenous variation that sometimes gives us stronger race responses that comes directly from the experimental data. And so I guess as we're combining these two, and there's the question of sample sizes, right? That's going on there. So there's kind of three things going on at the same time with some of the, and you can see I'm sorting this out currently, looking at different examples. It's driven by different aspects. So sometimes it's really that the experimental data pulls it away from substitutionary to complementary relationships. Sometimes it's a combination of the prior that's kind of pushing in that direction, where the prior maybe the previous literature says that should be substitutionary. And then the experimental data would say, no, it's strong complementary, and would you end up with something in the middle, or, and sometimes it pulls it over enough to be sensitive. There's not always strong information in the data, despite exogenous price variation. That's partially different by sample sizes in some of these subsystems, but not exclusively. I think the precision gain is more clear because if you're putting in more precise information and through tighter priors, then you see this precision gain. So that's kind of the quality of the Bayesian estimator being a shrinkage estimator. So in the what I showed you, the results was with zero means and zero and very large prior variances. So this was kind of mimicking a standard frequentist estimation where you include no previous information. But yeah, so it's quite a combined effect, and it's not. It's clearly a crucial question, and I wish I had a cleaner answer. So the referees were also still question about this aspect, and so thank you.
Thank you
like
so much.
these things.
Thank you, William.
Thank you, Andres, for the question. First, I would like to mention that evidence about complementarities or substitution effect among SSB and alcoholic drinks is quite mixed. We started this work hypothesizing that people or households that consume sugar beverages could displace to alcoholic drinks, especially beer. So we expected a substitution pattern, but when after running many multiple econometric checks and looking at the evidence, we have found this complementary effect. In terms of policy implications, I would like to mention 3 points. The first one is that the results for SSB is quite standard in the literature. Taxes could increase could derive in price increases, then reduce sugar beverage consumptions, then potentially could reduce obesity prevalences among other health results. The second one is that this complementarity could lead to also reduce alcoholic drinks consumptions that also in terms of public health have some good benefits. For example, could reduce car accidents and alcohol related diseases. But the third point, and it's an interesting one, especially in Colombia, is about tax collection. And now in Colombia, there is in discussion the implementation of sugar sweetened beverage taxes. Here there are no one specific up to now, but also the system, we have a health system that is financed partially with taxes collected from alcoholic drinks. Then if you introduce health taxes and with potentially obtain a decrease in taxes collected from alcoholic drinks, this could impact the whole system finance as a whole, especially here in Colombia for municipalities that are the collectors of alcohol taxes.
Great, thank you, William. So you see an important aspect there being on the revenue side. Liana, you raise your hand.
No, that's right. Actually, I didn't want, just because I was sorry, a bit slow in the morning here. I just wanted to maybe add one aspect why we went Bayesian that wasn't so clear. It's actually really hard to find precision estimation in the literature because these multi-stage systems aren't too trivial to estimate, and so actually, so one reason why it's not so easy to compare to precision in the literature is when you go back, all these studies that we have there is actually no precision information available. So partially it's also establishing some of these patterns. And therefore we went into the Bayesian framework, not only to show that they're lower, but actually to get precision estimate, because as a policymaker, you'd like to know how confident are we in different price elasticities, as all of us, thinking about the prices is right. It's not just, is it positive or negative, but actually how confident are we? So that was actually one of the reasons, aside from including additional information that Tony felt was being thrown away in the literature so far, to actually at least be upfront about it and say like, oh yeah, like for us in our case, it was between regular and dietary soft drink, right? You'd hope you put in a sugar tax and then people move from soft drink to dietary soft drinks, right? That'd be really interesting things. And that wasn't something that Tony and Nung were really keen, to investigate a bit further. And so it was a bit disappointing, that you see some small effect, but it's not very, very strong in either of the estimations that we have done. So it's not just doing Bayesian for the fun of it, but yeah. So we're still searching. If anyone has any suggestion where I can find more price, compare a bit in the literature. There's some of these studies that I've mentioned in the paper, but very few have price elasticities on all these ones that we look at in cross price elasticities. So any paper that has any food groupings that you've, like from the 5 groups, I'd be quite interested if anyone has any papers that we've missed, or, that would be really, that we really appreciate that. Thanks.
Absolutely. And Shuen says that their estimates in the US on regular versus diet carbonated drinks also found a small cross prices elasticity. So
yeah.
Yeah.
Yes, yeah.
Great. Okay. I think there are no more comments or questions. Just the paper that I didn't know it. It's very interesting that Ana Balsa sent over the in the text box. I think that probably this is the silver lining of Zoom conferences, being able to share links. So with that, I think I'll adjourn this meeting 2 minutes earlier. Thank you so much for your time and for your willingness to stay here. It's late in some places, very early in others. So we appreciate that and hope you're having fun in IHEA. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Can I just ask Shu maybe if she could send me a reference if she's still there? Because she cited some.
Shuen is still there.
She went because about the US drink market, some estimates that would be really cool if she has just some names. I'd be happy to send it to my mail.
Bye-bye.